Before the horizon chooses a color, the destroyer escort eases to dead slow, bow whispering through black water that returns no light. The wake draws a hush of a V. In the TBS shack, Ensign Rory Vale leans over the flameproof key, spring stiff under his palm, bakelight cold and slick. The deck thrums with the engine's lowest note. Rain pulses on the deckhead, patter to hiss to patter. In his headset, the static has teeth. He clocks Zulu, glances at the coordinate groups in block letters, and begins to send, wrist tight, finger cramped, trying to make the ocean accept a plan written dry. Dot is 1 unit, dash is 3. 1 between parts of a letter, 3 between letters, 7 between words. Vale keeps the metronome in his skull, but humidity has swollen the felt and the spring's rebound lags. The first group, letters that draw a patch of water just east of a narrow lagoon, goes clean. He locks cadence, jaw set, ear tuned for backscatter. The second is timing, a window razored to a quarter hour. A squall to starboard arrives early, rain static peaking like crumpled foil in his ears. He pushes on, sweat skimming down his temple, when a single dot lingers a fraction too long. The gap smears, the M he meant leans toward N, and 15 minutes drop out of true. Lieutenant Evan Hart stands in the doorway, hand on the frame, pinching the bridge of his nose. Chief Warrant Hand's cipher pad from the flagship sits under his palm, one corner torn jagged, a triangle missing that nibbles a grid letter. Hart traces the overlay's red pencil box, a square near a coral shelf. Procedure sits tight in his chest. The challenge reply is supposed to stop small errors from becoming missions. Dawn's thin sliver and the Catalina's fuel margin pull at him. Skip the challenge, he says, not to Vale, but to the clock. He buys seconds on credit. Under a mildewed poncho in the mangroves, Sergeant Lena Ishii hunches over a damp notebook, pencil greasy. Roots ladder around her, mud holds her knees cool. Her team breathes in a 3-count spread, eyes on the break in trees, ears on water ticking under leaves. She cups the field radio handset in a scarf to keep drops off the contacts, whip antenna pressed into glossy foliage. The incoming is moth-bent, dits knocked sideways. She listens to cadence as much as letters. The time group teeth her pencil. She writes, smears, corrects, dares herself to fill gaps she knows not to fill. Miles south, a PBY Catalina lifts in a plume of spray, glittering an instant under a veiled moon. Lieutenant CMDR. Ada Morales feels the hull release the last chop, floats hissing, then the long climb under a ragged scud lid at 1,500 feet. She'll have to thread under to keep eyes on surf lines. Co-pilot calls numbers. Fuel needle flirts with comfort, then falls into a narrow alley that dawn will narrow more. The manual says a dozen hours. Cargo and weather say less. The rendezvous window eats what's left. She sets course, radio cold by doctrine, orbit planned over the right reef without broadcasting anything a listening post could teach itself to hear. Rain beads on the escort's antenna wire, droplets clustering like mercury before popping, each release a crackle that twists into Vale's rhythm. He widens gaps to keep dots from bleeding into dashes, compensation drilled into muscle memory. The key drags today, a grit in the hinge or in his wrist, pad angled wrong. He hesitates longer than the manual likes, then taps out a grid letter, nudged 1 column east by that torn edge. Hart nods, accepts, moves to the chart. Transmit complete, Vale says, though a dot already decided to be something else. Alone on the flagship, Hans sits under a yellow lamp, cipher sheets fanned, pencils smudging. Tropical air turns graphite to fog. A bold column letter, an eraser ghost, the torn corner. Together they shave a spine. He copies overlay to sheet, checks strike-throughs from last watch, promises himself a clean copy afterward. He circles, scratches out, redraws. The message rides back down the chain certified, paper and eyes pretending to stop waterborne drift. Under the poncho, Ishi writes each group twice, passes the book to Corporal Reyes, who runs a finger under each character like an old school teacher grading salvation. Margins damp, pencil squeaks. She doodles an N beside the minute group on reflex, the pattern sounded off. She circles it, crosses it, trusting procedure over gut. A faint lace of foam combs the roots. Insects shift to daytime key. They move, slow, deliberate, using mangrove fingers as cover, trusting the grid to deliver a silhouette where the lagoon bites the island. Morales runs the line low enough to smell salt in the cockpit, engines sipping, eyes scanning for the shelf the overlay described. The scud makes her pupils wide, the lid won't lift. She holds silence by rule and rumor. A headland with ears said to rattle plates when someone speaks wrong. A Dawn HF bell can draw triangulation like a net. She checks Zulu to fuel, the circle she's carving in air, the tight rendezvous, hopes the boat crew in the dark water doesn't read one square off. On the bridge, Hart and the skipper trade sentences that sound like directions and are. Hold the east edge of the chain, Hart says, finger on a reef rectangle like a white bone. Keep TBS clear unless we correct. The skipper nods at the cloud-flattening contrasts. Hart's insistence on clarity shifts to boast, and he misses it. We'll make the window. He runs through the briefing, abort to secondary at +10, and weighs it against human reality. He shelves the choice. Dawn hasn't forced it. In the shack, Vale wipes the key with his sleeve, darkening wet with wet. He knows the feel of a key that will hang, how a sticky paddle turns a dot into a dash, and he knows he should have cracked the casing and dried it after last squall. He also knows they are one of 3 ships trying to keep a clean channel through air that doesn't care. He opens and closes his fist, ache running wire-thin to his elbow. He wonders if the operator ashore is good and hates himself for asking a question that, if answered no, lands on him. The recon team slides along a narrow estuary into the lagoon, fish roiling under the belief Dawn is safer. Mangrove mud kisses and lets go. They carry light. Speed is cover. The lagoon shows as a black mirror cut by coral teeth, white only when swell speaks. There should be a sand spit like a fingertip, a landmark that decides pickup. In the early haze, a notch in the reef reads like that spit. Pattern recognition taps Ishi's shoulder. If you squint, a notch becomes a spit. The map in her head agrees just enough to be dangerous. On a PBY strut, rain forms a silver moss. Static pricks at the headset's edges. Morales checks engine needles. Steady enough. She banks over what she believes is the shelf, white froth where swell meets coral, geography as certain to her as grease pencil lines. She looks for a hull's wake, a V in the pre-dawn flat, and sees smooth, a C indifferent to schedules. Fuel is fine, but only as a fuse is fine before it burns. Hart leans to the chart, and the overlay in his mind clicks from maybe to fact. He doesn't see the way the torn corner tilted a line and moved a letter an inch right. The boat crew already has heading and time. They are threading coral toward a gap that fits their chart and intuition. That combination is strong until a black shape at the lagoon edge is rock, not hull. Vale hears a faint backscatter, a ghost sender a half-beat behind, Dawn's skywave playing mirror. He tilts with small breath to avoid fogging the mic. The flutter at dawn is known, layers in the sky that blur short edges. It could be nothing. It could be ears. He almost transmits a confirm. Hart's order to hold the air for corrections kills it. He lets the channel breathe and waits. Ishi holds them with 2 fingers, studies the lagoon again. The notch she picked sits closer to the reef edge than it should, shade wrong in the not-quite sun. Her ankle pulses the surf's tempo where coral meets sand. Tide speaks that language. The minutes matter. rising or falling water decides between a hull nosing in and a keel scarred on old coral. 15 early, and the plane will be ahead. 15 late, and light will lay them out on a plate for anyone with binoculars on the headland. Her finger taps the circled crossed N. Move. Hesitation becomes decision. Han rubs a thumb across a penciled delta near the grid column, a prior corrections ghost. Graphite transfers, smears an echo of certainty. He resolves to start a clean page after this. He never does. He pulls the lamp close and trades neatness for speed. Morales drops a few feet to make the reef line pop with a different angle. Scud makes down and up the same. The window to hold and leave looks passable, with a touch extra if they spend the reserve promised to no one. She takes a wider circle over a different segment, tempted to break silence for a whisper. Trained not to. Hiss in her headset is rain and air, the same hiss that made a dot long and a window wrong. Vale writes the sent message by hand, as if ink retrofits time. Underlines the time, then the grid letter, replaying tap length like a song that won't leave. Did he? He shuts the book. Second guessing won't send anything. Any correction now must be clean enough to punch through rain and reach a notebook going to mush. He flexes the cramp away and hopes the stick was a ghost, not a warning. The lagoon is glass. Low tide brushes nothing. Ishi and her team melt into the edge where mangroves break to sand. The window is theirs if the world cooperates. The sky bruises. The moon thins behind gauze. A far engine's wide note, ghosts, and she clamps down on the part that would step out and wave. Survival and procedure are sometimes friends. On the bridge, Hart calls to the whaleboat to hold 30 yards off the coral until they see the team. The boat crew nods. The boat's chronometer hurries while the ship's clock denies. If not by +10, we go secondary, the skipper says flat. Doctrine with weight. Rain curtains and lifts, visibility breathing. Hart blames weather in advance. Self-blame won't help. He drafts a correction in his head, short, convincing, already late if the squall marching from the south keeps its promise. The weather picks an interim. Scud hangs like dirty cotton. Rain falls in filaments, enough to make wires sing and the shack a small storm. Vale rests a fingertip on the brass key, feeling grit that wasn't there at departure. A salt crystal, a burr, making the hinge half a motion late. No time to disassemble. The next message might have to be everything. The correction, apology, net across a moving sea. The rumor of ears on the headland sits like a third party in every decision. Maybe a dish, maybe nothing. The silence window they honor turns redundancy into gamble. Without challenge reply, the check that forces content to match or crash, truth becomes whatever ink hardens in Ishi's notebook. Rain threatens to wash even that. A sliver of east light rises. Shadows flatten. Reef teeth flash white. Dawn's false clarity. Over the wrong shelf, the PBY banks with habit-born confidence. Over the right notch, the team waits at the edge, ready to be cut out by hard light if a hull doesn't interpose between them and a headland sightline. The sea between points is patient. On Hart's table, the overlay skates a fraction. The red pencil box goes east, exactly where a torn corner made it easy to believe the letter belonged. He exhales. Geometry aligns. He calls it good and steps aside. The ghost on frequency fades. No ambush, no counterfeit, just dawn's backscatter. Its absence leaves a silence more ominous than noise. Vale's scalp prickles as if he missed hearing a warning. Ishi lifts her head, certain the drone is theirs. It's surf. She lowers, touches the circled crossed N, and squeezes one more minute. Above, Morales rolls level. Fuel needle twitches like sleep. She can hold the window, but not long, not with low cloud forcing inefficient paths. A single swollen dot somewhere has picked a reef for her, and she doesn't know it. By the time the day begins, pieces are locked. The whaleboat heads for a square with no team. The team stands in a lagoon with no boat. The Catalina circles a reef that belongs to nobody. Waves between them carry proportion indifferently. On the table, the overlay sits one square east, the dot not noticed. The wrong grid becomes a beach because Ishi makes it so. She emerges from shade into a lagoon that fits what Night suggested. A crescent of calm, a notch like a mouth, a spit that almost matches briefing grease pencil. Slack tide lays a glass skin that hides coral heads until shin meets them. Faces streaked with charcoal, the team stays low, packs tight. Even their long exhale throttles down. The pickup window feels like a platform, then becomes the sound of no engine, no hull slap, no trolling motor. The horizon where a silhouette should rise shows only rain curtains standing like drawn drapes. 10 becomes 8 became 6, and in pre-dawn shape she sees the notch, and then a shimmer above it, heat-trapped air wobbling, makes another notch wink farther down coast. She finds the notebook and the N she circled, then crossed, pencil bled into paper fiber. Small decisions fuzz. Sky layers, high cirrus milk the moon, low scud pushed by an impatient breeze, the first smear of east. A heron lifts and becomes two wings on a different plane. Odds shift with light, silhouettes cut differently at dawn. Coconut palms change from blur to pointing fingers, and eyes produce what they hope to see. 2 fingers down. Wait. They settle into mangrove ribs where roots cage, leaving a boat-wide gap that holds only a gentle lap. Her watch ticks. The second hand draws a perfect circle she begins to resent. At the edge of sound, a low thunder fails to be engines, settles into salt. She nudges the field set's dial upward, gives the whip a better angle against wet leaves, listens to foliage swallow worlds. Static rustles like heavy rain on canvas. She pictures the escort's antenna wire beating rain, popping with charge, unaware that what she needs is caught in its own weather. She doesn't key. Rumored ears on the headland dictate silence. Her team looks to her because training teaches eyes where authority sits. She looks to water because that's where decisions arrive. Morales circles the mirror of the right reef shelf's twin a few miles east, identical enough to count as real if your map is wrong. The PBY is heavy with the manuscript promise of endurance, rewritten by humidity, weight, and low cloud. The engineer shows the fuel gauge's tremor with a tilt. The needle flirts south after each bank. The gauge dramatizes balance. Radio listens, no transmit, the scaffold of doctrine. The manual calls mirrors secondary, effective to miles. Rumor says guns flash the same if seen through rain. She holds altitude low, white foam lines on reef like stitches, and looks for a boat threading in. The ocean offers only bright spindrift and dark patches that could be coral or the shadow of wish. Aboard the escort, a correction is typed in the measured rush of penance, letters and numbers that should have been a formality and now must be rescue. Hart stands behind veil, flame-proof key black and brass, spring stiffer in the wet. Rain snarls in the wires, precipitation static that turns dots soft. Hart almost says, "Challenge this time," then swallows. Seconds now cost too much. His cipher pad is torn, deltas penciled where they shouldn't be, smudges surviving napkins. Han's overlay brought neat grid letters and numbers. Hart trusts neat under fire, a place overconfidence hides. Veil taps. Morse timing is bone deep. Rain stretches and compresses units like tired rubber. The correction is simple. Verify grid letter, west by 1. Time revert to 0430 Zulu. An apology pretending not to be an apology. The key sticks on a dot and he snaps the next dash short. Somewhere a receiving ear hears N for M and the quarter hour slips again. Hart hears his breath and then static like frying fat. The squall chooses this moment to go absolute, a wall dragged across the ship. The correction, already fragile for skipping challenge reply, drowns. Onshore, dawn's flutter erases high tones. Dits go thin while das survive, a bias that turns letters into traps. Veil leans harder, as if force penetrates water and sky. Heart mouths, "We should have challenged," and a wave bumps him silent. On the flagship, Hans' pencil finds the pivot. An M shaved into N shifts the minute block, and by the cipher's own lattice, nudges the grid letter east. He underlines west in red. Cancel previous. Correct grid 1 west. Time plus 15. He thinks of the back and forth that would have forced a clash and reset truth, and of a memo that promised corners would get cut under fire. He strokes the correction large and hates the power small paper has. Up in the Catalina, sun breaches ragged and unreliable. Cloud strands drip light in patches like oil. Mirrors aren't SOP primary, they're backup and promise. A wingtip flicks in a code that means eagerness only. Morales reads C. A sparkle pulses off something long and bright. Reef spitting sunlight. No code. "There?" Her co-pilot points and she says, "We can't transmit." The rule lands back in his mouth. In the lagoon, daylight sharpens the outline that kills. Terrain mirage at dawn is something she passed on paper. Now warm air warps lines near the horizon. Notches appear, drift, and settle just enough to tempt. She decides to believe what the eye can tolerate, signals a 20-pace slide toward the mouth she chose. Starfish crunch under the silt-like teeth. Everything here bites if you put weight wrong. She touches the field set again. The urge to key is a warm coin she lets cool. They all believe in the same clock until it doesn't deserve it. Below, Hart runs math. Window minus 0430, minus 6 for the boat, minus the minutes lost to squall and his thin yes to urgency. SOP is how you keep groups alive and sometimes kill teams. He thinks of Ishii as a type, then as a face under canvas, tide maps in her head. He nods to the boat chief, "Go anyway." Tide waits for no pencil. He hands a bad belief forward, curses the debt aloud to nobody. "If squall breaks," he tells Vale, "again." Wishes are not plans. The whaleboat squeals on cables, oars stacked, small engine coughing into tick. Caps soft, faces hard, men sit forward with hands on weapons that mean something if the wrong colors move in mangrove. The coxswain has read water long enough to find reef slots without maps. Their grid comes off a slip, born of a drifted letter. The bow points at a mouth that looks like every mouth until you learn better. Rain becomes veil to sheet to veil. The boat leaves the ship's quiet and enters open error. In the air, a faint wrong signal ghosts the PBY's receiver, a backscatter hum. The radio man asks with eyebrows if they're not alone or just hearing reflections. Morales shakes once. They won't challenge. Paranoia gets discipline. The ghost passes like a wave that forgets to break. The engineer touches his gauge again. Needle jitter maps, if not the tank, then the cockpit. On the headland, rumor tightens backs. A listening post might crouch there under palm and canvas. That rumor sits on Ishii's shoulder, loops around Morales's throttle hand, rides Vale's fingers. Silence windows lock doors when kindness would be a shout. Every rule is a bargain. No one likes to pay in rain. Light spreads. Tide begins to think. On shelves like these, a half-knot set will walk you half a mile in an hour. The plan didn't include drift. Current slides her calf like a hand. Wait too long, and roots snare, or the cut flushes you into open water in front of a glass. She orders them 10 yards west along the lagoon's inner edge, thigh-deep slow, toward a cleaner opening that also makes them a cleaner target. Morales's navigator chooses to see bruised water where the right notch should be, a curve of darker inside the reef's white comb. Thread the needle or go. Fuel won't offer a third option. Voice comms would solve this in a sentence and draw a net. Morales shades left, then right, a tiny slide that costs fuel and buys chance. 10 minutes, she says for the departure line. The engineer's eyebrows arch a question she answers with a nod that tastes like a dare. Vale's correction finds a hole in the squall and walks ashore in pieces. Ishi's Kamo hears M where N should be. Damp paper swells under eraser. Ishi watches, decides in the crack between what they wanted and what they have. If west, we can still make it. If time plus 15, earlier, is safer than later. She commits her team to a 10-minute push west in thigh water, termites crawling up her calves. It's a race. The headwind whispers across skin of sea. The PBY bucks slight. Morales considers popping up into cleaner flow. Scud holds a lid. The gunner calls flashes again, staggered by cloud, returning to cadence as the sun dents another sheet of vapor. Repetition feels intentional. She commits to the west swing. The bruise resolves, the right geometry living in the world. In the shack, Vale's chief leans in, recognizes the look of procedures welded to improvisation with fatigue as flux. A hand on the radio man's shoulder. Again, then off, the chief says without saying. Vale keys the correction one last time, clean as possible, then kills transmit. Let the static decay. Cloud unspools a long, even gray. Mirrors lose sun. Ishi takes one more measurement of risk. Doctrine says abort at plus 10. Jungle says moving now betrays wake and route. If not by full light, fall back, she whispers, eyes on the bruise. Her second nods without looking. The bruise ripens inland like a wound. Dawn's last trick, a faint carrier lifts and drops on Han's set. He reads local flutter, not hostile. Not an ambush, he notes. The relief is cold. Mischief has been theirs alone. He flags the correction up the line, voice scraping wire. It has miles of wet air to cross and minutes to matter. The reef shelf is undeniable now. White water patterns shift. Inside, the lagoon wears the bruise. Morales scans mangroves for movement. Mirror, detail out of place. Headwind presses their nose. The gunner points. Figures low in the cut. Mirror stutter, a discipline of cadence under cloud. The plane's shadow passes over them and peels away. The intersection finally exists. Below, Ishi hears the engine shift. Relief cuts so sharp it scares. She throws weight. Her team makes space for a hull that might nose in. Tide pulls their knees. Easy water becomes trap in minutes. She glances once into the mangrove, where upon exit their night will erase itself, then back to the surf where approach geometry and timing decide. Vale sits hands off the key, listening to static as if it will admit a verdict. He counts how long a boat needs to cross a quarter-mile of coral-studded lagoon with contrary tide, while a letter drifted reality by inches. He thinks about a dot hung long, about what 1 unit means when your palm is wet. He looks at the key, dull brass and black, tool married to intent, now a weight. Han slides the overlay back 1 west, red pencil box settling where it belonged. Satisfaction is private and useless on water, but he does it anyway. Ritual against drift. The torn corner of the pad earns a note so loud he will make sure no one misses it later. He clocks the minute. If Morales turns now, she arrives before headwind eats the rest. Morales drops the nose and makes a straight pass over the lagoon to read debris. Black shapes might be coral, might be trash, might be backs. Sun angle aligns. Mirrors strobe. Hand darts by rule, not panic. Trained people where trained people said they'd be, except paper shifted. She can set down if wind plays honest. Scud will eat the climb out. Landing slow on teeth could trade a half dozen for a crew. Ugly choices, cut clean. Doctrine says at plus 10, you go to secondary. Doctrine does not cover clean ends in margins. The boat from the destroyer commits to the wrong notch, and then, honest enough to admit emptiness, turns west, prop catching coral and swearing. It will still be close. Rain skates along the antenna. Vale catches Morales' call sign in a breath, then loses it. He wants to send one letter, stay, but the frequency turnpikes are full of daylight. He swallows it. Discipline tastes metallic. Ishii breaks cover low, bent, chest deep through the cut. Current tries to stagger them into exposure. The mirror flashes again for whatever sun the cloud allows. Their signal is the slap of water and the pattern they rehearsed in a gym under fluorescent buzz stateside. Morales calls for the boat drop. Crew chief slides the canvas-wrapped bundle to the blister. The line is coiled, flare ready, hands measured. They've done it in better water, not with a headwind that wants to drag them off the plumb. One pass, Morales says. If it fouls, they will not circle. The fuel needle trembles into the part of the dial that is feeling. Morales keeps throttle exactly between indulgence and stall. One pass, she repeats, voice level to steady others more than herself. The package tumbles, line sings. They will the rubber to land clear of coral. Ishii doesn't wait for still. Two men sprint chest deep, catch line, rope burn under wet cloth. The boat drags heavy, water wicking into every seam. A man slips, the pack on his back becomes a stone, and Ishii's knife cuts a strap as reflex. The pack sinks, one cargo that felt critical 10 minutes ago disappearing into silt. The PBY yaws a hair on the line's drag. Crew chief pays, then takes slack, ballet with gravity. Head, the co-pilot calls, a coral brain where the diagonal crosses in half a minute. Ishii angles weight, mouths silent orders. Two men push with bare feet, skin slicing. Rubber kisses rock. The boat skims into deeper water. The pump head cracks, ridden too hard too long. Dewey produces gray cloth tape like it grew in his palm, lashes hose to valve with farm-taught knots. The tape holds. Air rounds the chamber. The boat settles heavy, but floats enough to carry one load if they keep weight honest. They load by vulnerability, radio, wounded, packets of paper, because keeping the machine going has a hierarchy that doesn't match heart. The radio goes first, carried like a child that refused to speak. It might yet. Wounded next, eyes on sky because they need to see something that isn't water. Vale counts seconds between passes and static pulses, mapping air moods that matter to nobody but his guilt. He lifts the key and sets it down. Saying nothing is the work. Han writes the line that matters. Dot-dash timing error, shifted window, grid drift east by column, correction masked by precip static and dawn flutter. He underlines once, slow. Thin line in a file, thick with thick lines. The line comes clean. The crew chief cuts it before it bites prop or drags death. The boat moves like a leaf across a river. Men wade waist deep to keep it straight, human channel markers. Each yard is bought with time. Morales can't sell twice. Low scud hangs lower. Morales cannot loiter to watch them finish. Climb or go. Low altitude, low fuel, turning into names on Plaque's territory. One more minute low power, she decides. Then home. Co-pilot sets the compass. Decisions lock. The mirror flashes once more, reflex. The sun slides behind a rag. Stutter dies. What remains is paddle slap, grunt, rubber on water. Ishii watches the plane's shadow, not the plane. Shadow size tells truth about time. Chop builds in the throat, wind meeting outgoing tide. The Catalina skims the wave with a foot to spare. The pressure drop hits the cockpit like a palm. Never again, every nerve says, while not moving is the only way to get away with doing it once. The first load reaches the middle, where a water landing pickup would be. There is not one. They hook toward the outer line where swell writes readable lines. Tidal set eases. Diagonal becomes something less murderous. Second load gets a chance. Morales pulls into a climbing turn that is fuel math and habit. Co-pilot marks Zulu. No one says they nearly put a hull down on teeth because a dot dragged. They say, mark, Turn. Home. On the escort, boat hooks and rope coils wait on the wrong side of a mooring. Hart watches a blank patch of distance. Vale hears the Catalina's clipped goodbye, a breath inside static. He answers with silence, intended to read as acknowledgement. Han stows the torn pad under a blotter. He circles the mandatory under all conditions next to authentication in SOP like paint on a hull seam. He writes the backscatter note, thick enough nobody can pretend the sky is a deliberate enemy next time. The boat rides lower. Hope adds weight. The pump squeals and holds under tape. They push off into sun that turns every ripple into a line and every line into a word. Bare feet bend around coral memories. The headland remains rumor, no binocular glint yet. The Catalina gets to altitudes kinder to fuel and less kind to nerves. Morales glances at fuel, horizon, and mostly at space immediately ahead. She lets herself imagine cooling engine metal and a hangar smell, then banishes it until metal warrants it. Second load meets the boat. Paddles find rhythm, hands over hands, rubber over water. Sky grows whiter. Great for precision, terrible for hiding. Headland stays rumor by being quiet. They turn back in. The stern dips to test physics. Tape holds, hose holds, buoyancy holds. They slide under green light into mangroves, rot and sap in their noses. Stand breathing like divers post-plunge. On the escort's desk, the brass key sits, spring resetting with a cough of metal only the man in the room hears. The burr still catches Vale's eye. He reaches for a file. Ocean lifts and drops with indifference. Rubber kisses root and becomes more boat than trouble. Hands pull. The team stands taller in relief's cheap illusion and doesn't test it by speaking. The Catalina's drone thins into humidity, a line of sound drawn out and snapped. If you could pull back, you'd see wing, reef, team, ship, headland rumor, torn pad, a chain held together by weather and people, and a dot. Under a lazy fan, Han closes his log. He taps the torn pad and decides the note will go in heavy. He will make backscatter prose, not an excuse. Vale steps outside. Clouds stack towers over land they can't see. Through his boots he feels the ship speak in low Morse against the sea. He files the key until the tiny raised grain is gone, metal warm under thumb. In the mangroves, Ishi wipes her notebook, traces the margin where she once circled N and crossed it. She writes 2 words, mirror, pump, snaps the book shut, pockets lighter by maps, heavier by breath. She looks to her team, nods. They nod back. The lagoon settles back toward picture. Underwater, a pack dissolves into pulp, tide tugging it through a throat and onto the shelf that makes all maps sand. The marine layer lifts. Cirrus keeps the moon like a thumbprint. A skiff of rain passes and leaves nothing to apologize for. Morales finds an altitude that lets her engines hum a crueltyless rhythm. Course, she says, and the co-pilot reads. The engineer, quiet for the first time in an hour, closes a palm over his gauge. The crew chief leans back and hears his pulse in rib and bulkhead. Back in the shack, the key waits. Outside, in an hour, another squall will make the wire spit sparks audible if you listen. Vale slips the file back in the drawer. He sets the key straight to the pad, thumb on cool brass. Ishi stows the mirror, sets a hand on the boat's rubber, and points west along the mangrove fringe. The water mutters against roots, the headland holds its secrets, and the first new footstep parts leaves that still drip. The key's cleared face catches a pin of sun. Vale inhales, lines up the next group, and presses.